And following the two talks, each of them is going to last for around 20-25 minutes. We are going to have a panel discussion, and you may post your questions and into the chat. If we do not end up being a very large group, sometimes we are, which makes it very difficult to kind of give the, give each person who would like to ask a question the floor. But this time, if we're not a very large group, we might as well do that and be a bit more even interactive and also get to know you. But without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my welcome slide, and I would like to welcome Hella to deliver her talk.
Thank you so much, Idil, and thanks everyone for joining us today on the sunny day. I will now start sharing my my slides. Can you all see the slides now?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so Idil already gave a very nice introduction. To say a few words about myself, I'm an architect with a background on the reuse of vacant spaces and participatory design in the urban development context, and I've been doing this work for the past 14 years or so. And recently, based on this background, I brought these experiences to my doctoral research, which is almost completed. And today I will give you a kind of informal account on focusing on the key empirical findings about mediator roles, which I have been investigating as an emerging type of professional role in the context of urban development. And if you want to reference something from the end of the presentation, here is the information about my thesis. But to give a bit of background on this topic, as we know, cities play a really important role in addressing really urgent global challenges we are facing today. Cities really need to radically reduce their impacts on climate change and resource depletion. And at the same time, they really need to be able to respond to ongoing uncertainties about political and economic conditions. And concerning our built environment, this really puts a lot of pressure for cities to develop more adaptable and inclusive ways of urban development. And especially, it's critical to understand how we could better utilize existing buildings and spaces rather than focusing on new, perhaps more energy efficient ones. In this context, vacancy is an important issue, and it's often also somewhat invisible and forgotten one. Office vacancy is one example that has been really topical in the Helsinki metropolitan area already for the past decade. The office vacancy rates have been high and staying high. So at the moment, there are over 1 million square meters of vacant office spaces, and this comprises 12% of the whole office stocks. And this is only one example of types of vacancies that there are. And in this photo, you see vacant or empty office buildings in the district of Kera in Espoo, which is the neighboring city of Helsinki, and it's been one of the sites in my doctoral study. So in my practice and research, I've been looking at temporary use of vacant spaces as one potential approach addressing the call for more adaptable and resource efficient and inclusive approaches to urban development. By temporary use, I mean it's actually a quite slippery and ambiguous concept where the word temporary is quite problematic, but I'm not going into that in more detail. But I mean here that temporary use is a way to activate spaces or properties that have lost their former function and are waiting for decisions on their future. And this waiting period can often last from months to even decades. And therefore, it's a really important opportunity for utilizing those spaces. And it's also often an opportunity for different types of actors to really start their or develop their activities and do something in those spaces that spurs also wider cultural benefits or socio-economical benefits in the cities. And it's not only the resource efficiency aspect that is relevant in temporary use, but it's also temporary use is kind of seen as a part of a broader set of urban phenomena that are changing the role of residents and citizens towards kind of more active actors that can contribute in a concrete way to urban development. And in this sense, I related to what's been discussed in the literature on urban sustainability transitions, where it's identified that these kinds of civil society initiatives can play a really critical role in reshaping kind of prevailing unsustainable practices and patterns in the urban context. And also more broadly, temporary use has been interpreted as part of transformation towards more iterative forms of planning. And there is a lot of criticism on the kind of current more rigid planning practices that they are not very well responding to these ongoing complexities and uncertainties. So even though temporary use has been really rapidly kind of spreading and developing, and some cities have been finding ways to accommodate and kind of formally deploy temporary uses in different ways, there are many challenges, and temporary use are operating very complex socio-political conditions. So to start with, it's a context that deals with a lot of different types of actors. There are the potential users that can be different groups like artists, cultural actors, entrepreneurs, residents of different ages, immigrants, and what is really the topic in my research is mediation as an emerging role for professional actors who manage and steer these socio-political dynamics and conditions. And it's been identified as relevant and necessary in enabling and advancing temporary use, and also in the field of urban sustainability transition scholarship. Related types of intermediation have been a lot discussed as really relevant. However, it's a topic that has been really little investigated in the temporary use scholarship. So there's very little academic research, and at the same time, it's really emerging rapidly in practice. So this is the kind of area that I have been looking at in my research, and I've been not going into detail, but because this topic really crosses disciplinary boundaries and practice, I've been combining conceptual approaches from different areas of literature to conceptualize and to articulate this practice of mediation. But empirically, I've been studying mediation from two different perspectives. Primarily, I've been studying my own work in a recent project in Espoo, where I was engaged through my own company, actually. And then I've been doing qualitative interviewing for different mediating agencies in Europe. This is the purpose here has been kind of to contextualize mediation in a bit broader context. Samoa in Nantes in Western France has a quite interesting urban development model where temporary use is integrated. So this company is responsible for the whole urban redevelopment of Harbor District, or former Harbor District of Ile-de-Nantes. And they own the properties and utilize this kind of time of planning the redevelopment when they rent out the properties for different actors in the creative industries. And this also plays a role in the kind of cultural transformation of this whole district. And the fourth interviewee was from an organization or NGO called Free Riga in the Latvian capital Riga. And this is an NGO that has developed a special house guardian service offered to property owners who are really struggling with vacancy in Riga since 2008. And Free Riga brings public benefit and cultural activities to these empty properties. And actually in this way, the property owners also get a huge tax reduction from property tax, which is otherwise really high for empty properties. So based on these empirical studies and the different concepts from literature, I identified 3 key roles in mediating temporary use, and I'm going to show some quick examples from these roles. And these are all kind of socio-politically focused roles, which was the focus in my research. So even though these mediators operate in a spatial context, I found it really relevant to address these socio-political questions in their work, because they seemed particularly relevant also thinking in terms of the sustainability aspect. So the first role I articulated as brokering the collaboration and partnerships between actors in temporary use. This photo here is from a workshop situation in the Kera project. So this role really involved a lot of different types of activities. I have divided these roles into different activities, focusing on building social networks between the temporary uses, matchmaking, helping them to create kind of communities that build synergies with each other, but also aiming to build partnership between, for example, users, owners, municipal actors, and helping them to collaborate in a way that helping them to communicate, translate when they don't understand each other, to try to build trust between the actors. And this role also involved processes of curating and selecting different types of temporary use activities, and obviously these processes involve a lot of negotiation between different priorities. And lastly, it was about building alignment, aligning the interests and resolving conflicts and negotiating different types of controversial issues between these people and groups. As the one example from the work in Kera, there was a really challenging situation actually, because the private property owners were quite not so convinced about temporary use at all, and they were prejudiced towards new types of users, such as artists or cultural actors. So some of the users from the art sector really found the mediation actually really important, because they had not been able to even get in touch with the property owners who just told them that they were not suitable tenants. The second role was about negotiating the structural conditions in temporary use. And here the activities were at different levels, so that mediators were engaged in strategic activities, including vision alignment, dealing a lot with legislation, interpreting how different regulations can be kind of interpreted or circumvented to allow temporary use. Also developing or suggesting and negotiating on new operational models, new business models, and so on. One example of this legislation activities was that in Ghent, the mediators had actually quite a strong agency to negotiate on circumventing regulations. This was because the city has a strategy that wants to advance and experimentation. And they understood that if we only go by the strict rules, we cannot do temporary use. and they talked about kind of gray zone, which is the area where temporary use operates. And they were able to formally negotiate on this gray zone. And then the last role, this is actually the 2 previous roles were quite strongly demonstrated in my studies, but this one is more tentative. It was not as clear, but still there were, I identified this as a perhaps also an area for further investigation. So this role concerns building capabilities for temporary use. And this concerns capabilities of all the different actors, although the mediators were a lot engaged in like advising the users in different ways, they also needed to, in a way, educate the different actors who perhaps were not so familiar with this approach. And it involved experimentation as a way to also learn and understand how temporary use can work and what it can bring. And this often involved participatory activities. That was also kind of, I interpreted it here as also way to advance the learning of the different actors. For example, in Nantes, the mediator talked actually about transitional uses, not temporary uses, but she thought that these experiments and temporary uses were quite important in a way to make the different parties to learn and to oblige them into new ways of thinking. So after this really quick running through some core findings, I say some last words about these mediator roles. So I believe that this kind of knowledge on these socio-political roles in urban development is quite relevant for understanding how professional work can contribute to sustainable urban development. But there are often, of course, different levels in which the mediator's work is important. And if you think about the kind of more structural changes that might be possible, they of course have limited agency, and their agency is limited in different ways. For example, how they are affiliated, what is the source of funding, and what is the time scale of their involvement. It really makes a big difference. For example, my work in this Kera project that was only 2 years, I found my abilities quite limited in a way to be able to negotiate any kind of, new policy level issues or anything like that. But anyway, what I have been looking at here can be maybe seen as examples of smaller steps within also longer term processes of transformation when we talk about the kind of more structural changes, and these can be seen as small steps in kind of stretching some of the unsustainable premises of the real estate and planning regimes. And this type of knowledge can be, I hope, very important also for practitioners and perhaps municipalities who are aiming to advance temporary uses. Finland is not very advanced in this area, so the 4 cities that I mentioned are much more advanced. And for example, in Helsinki, there is a recent real estate strategy that has announced that they want to advance temporary use, but I have not seen really how this strategy is implemented as yet. So perhaps this type of understanding these roles can be quite relevant. And I also think that it can be important to think about mediation and the kind of socio-political dynamics to understand them in a nuanced way in order to kind of find ways to develop temporary use and other related processes in a way that is fair towards the different stakeholders, because there is often the threat of kind of taking the positive effects from temporary use that are kind of from the voluntary effects of the users and then kicking them out, and then the property owners gets the kind of financial benefit and so on. So these are quite actually nuanced issues that need some attention. Thank you. I'm looking forward to Elina's ideas and questions later. I hope I didn't exceed my time too much.
Thank you, Hela. It was perfectly timed. And yes, now we can have Elina's talk. And everyone, please think of good questions to ask. After Elina's talk, we're going to move into a panel discussion.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having this opportunity here to share some of the experiences around this mediation of vacant spaces. I think the sharing is now okay, should be, yes. So my backgrounds are quite similar actually as Hela's, in a way that I'm an architect and also have been doing different kinds of experiment with different groups around different places for last 10 years or so, or even a bit more. And here I'm now going to go deeper inside one case in Hernberg, Tampere. And this case is also central in my PhD studies that I'm doing in environmental policy in Tampere University. And Hernberg is a former industrial area that also has a mansion and some wooden small houses, but mainly these kinds of factories, as here in the image, that the city of Tampere bought 2014. And since that, there has been different kinds of experiments and projects in activating and taking these spaces back into use with different user groups, and such as skateboarders. Many of you might have heard about these stories, as there is already now a new skateboarding high school even coming from this long cooperation with the city and this group of young and older people, circus artisans, artists, different kinds of societal enterprises and schools, local like vocational schools. The university has been quite active in the area as well. And then different kinds of green startups also have found their possibility to start growing here. And where we are located, a bit north from Helsinki, here in the center, towards the center of the Finland. And actually, Tampere city center is here east from the two lakes, and there is a rapid that is running through the city and has been the power source of industrialization. So the city has lots of these red brick buildings from the era of its birth. And Hiedaranta is located here, something like 4 kilometers from the city center, just by one of the big lakes. And this is approximately the situation even at the moment. So we have these pulp factory buildings, a set of those, a manor house, some green space like park, and then lots of empty areas. And it was really like gated before the city bought the area. But there's a huge development coming on, aim for even like a new Western center for the city of Tampere. And there is all these ideas of sustainability behind it, of course, like trying to get infill building that is housing many people, many activities very tightly around public transportation, and thus also these ecological sustainability goals have also high social sustainability goals, and that's why there was this activation with the people of the areas. And how then we found our way there was that we had this kind of a research project funded by Academy of Finland during years 2016 and 2019, where two of researchers, me and Mikko Kyrönviita, who also had a background in urban activism and these kinds of experiments, got this kind of inspiration that, okay, there has been these different groups of people now in their different spaces in the area, doing their own things, but how could it be somehow possible to get these people together, somehow to mix more, do something new, a kind of a new ignition or spark in the area, and even maybe how to invite new kinds of activists, because these who were the pioneers to come to the area had this knowledge and skills and networks to start taking spaces into use and to collaborate with the city. But how to get this area opened up for people who don't have this kind of a background or skills. And then there came the idea that maybe building a sauna could be that kind of a thing, that is kind of a magnet. Almost all Finns love sauna. And of course, there was this inspiration of Sompa sauna, for example, in Helsinki. That what about that? Something like that, something a bit self-organized. And as soon as the idea came up, the Hiedaranta development program, so the people from the city got quite inspired, and there was this. The timing was perfect in a way that we had lots of trust between different actors in the area, and there was this kind of a family or even kind of a small village feeling in Hiedaranta, and so we just simply thought to give it a try. So the idea was to design and build, maintain together sauna that is free of charge, that can be warmed up anytime. And so quite ambitious in a way, like let's see what happens. First phase of this was from spring 2017 starting. It included lots of different kinds of messiness and challenges that I want to share here with you, because it tells a bit of what it actually then is when you start to find your way to activate spaces, even though there is goodwill behind, and even though you have the support of the local authorities. For example, you might even have the economical resources to do things. And like here, we also had a huge amount of people to the first meeting to design the sauna. There came 60 people, and it was almost like what? How do we do this? How do we design a sauna with 60 people? Well, we figured up some kind of a way to start negotiating, like what do we actually want. And the first thing was that let's do a floating sauna on top of the lake, because that's a real situation that we have here. And already that decision brought up this kind of things that the city was not, or the developers in the area were not so familiar yet. That actually there is this zero fiber that is a kind of a sawdust that has come slowly through the pulp industry to the lake, and it's nothing really dangerous as such. It's just a kind of a biomaterial that is rotting in the bottom. But there is huge amounts of it. So there is something like 10 meters sediment, and logs have been getting stuck in it in a way that if you, for example, swim there or boat, those logs might jump up and hit you. And it is also something that is smelling a little bit like a methane or something, because it's rotting there. And it also produces lots of heat. But this was not really in our knowledge when we started to think of the floating sauna, and even had the support from the city authorities that yeah, you might do something like that. So one thing that these vacant space activation projects do is that they bring visible and mirror something that is not maybe visible as such in the processes that are done as business as usual in the city development. So that was one example of it. So then the sauna moved to Melia Pier. This is a place where the logs through which the logs were imported to the factory area. So they were floated on top of the lake and then here taken on land and to the factory. So it was also taking some couple of months to negotiate this location, and then we found out in the end that it is thought to be historically so valuable that we shouldn't do anything even temporary on top of it. And then the next location was by a sand beach that is very close here, because there is one small area where you might maybe be able to swim even, because the zero fiber and the locks and all these dangerous things don't start yet from there. But then again, a couple of months go, and the soil was found contaminated, and people start to get quite frustrated at this point. You can imagine that, okay, we want to build this sauna, we have the resources, but if we take this seriously, it seems like in this area, if you want to do something like this, it's even if it's temporary, you need to do it mobile. So there came the cargo containers, and we actually got those. You can see them here. But this process had already taken 2 years to negotiate, and people really got quite tired and burned out and even lost hope, like we will never get a sauna here. And but we had the plot between the manor house and factories. This is the site. But there was also lots of frustration in the partners inside the city. So we got these notes that, well, you should have just been a bit more radical and done it regardless of whatever the authorities say or the legal processes say, that we were actually thinking you to be a bit more radical in this sauna building. But yeah, there was a block we gave out. It was spring 2019. But what happened then? Suddenly, just a couple of months after we had given out, and there were something like 20 active people still at that moment, but then we decided that it's too much, we can't do it alone. There was a contact from Dutch student group with a course on building something small wooden, and they had heard that this Hiedaranta is an area. They had some connections to our university, that perhaps they could come here to do something, and they were connected to us, and this new possibility that started by them coming in is the phase that I want to hear now, discuss a bit more with you. Because it was so sudden, it brought together a new amount of energy, and we didn't really have time to figure out who is doing really what, or how we are actually doing it. So there was lots of self-organization in it. People were stepping out of their normal roles. We didn't have these fixed roles, and there weren't really public nor private actors taking the lead, so to say. So that is the research question of this part. And with self-organization here, I mean some kind of a spontaneous process where is no really externally applied control, but new kinds of solutions, new order, and new outcomes that are not really known in advance appear. And what we found out here, and you can follow it throughout the story, is that this kind of self-organization can be a source of creativity, both for problem solving as for making things happen when they are really stuck. And you can also hear kind of both potential and then a risk of disruption in a way that it challenges the business as usual. And the way of how you can think of co-creation is that it is something that can involve lots of self-organization. So you can start doing things together where also people have and the process have lots of way to self-organize. So what this meant in practice was that we had a 2-week intensive time when these students from Delft University came, and in a way it was a win-win situation for all, because like us, we had done the groundwork, we had the fights and had all the resources ready. So it was possible for the intensive course to jump in. And this intensive course, then again, and the students, they brought a much needed new flash of energy and inspiration to us. And then this also ignited and invited again former activists, the local people back in a way because of this new source of hope. And this sudden intensive period was also a reason good enough for city to override different kinds of things and to do them without too much of thinking, let's say. And we didn't have exact plans, for example. We had something like, I had especially this kind of a role that Hella also was talking about, this like negotiating the structural conditions. So I was really going to the building right people and saying that, well, we're going to do something like this. We have this plot and we have 3 small buildings and they are maybe approximately something like here towards that direction. And okay, yeah, you can do something. So we had one meeting before the students came to Finland. Where we got the idea with the local actors that actually we would benefit a lot in Hiedaranta to have some kind of a stage also. There is missing a stage to perform different kind of things, to have musical gigs or stuff. And then the needs of the students meant that we are going to build a sauna out of wood and use the 2 containers, maybe as dressing rooms or something like that. And suddenly the Skateboarders Association, that had quite a lot of skills and experience in building there locally things, had also possibilities to acquire building materials quite quickly. They had former sponsorships and things like that. So they joined us and they also joined the small groups of the students to guide them. So in a way they were assisting in the building itself, and the teacher who was guiding the students in these small groups as part of even practical teachers. And so also the structural details were planned on the go, and that was part of the idea of the course itself. They were discussed and tested and experimented by building, and responsible for making sure that everything still was something that is realizable and is going to be a sauna that you can have a sauna in, was on the shoulders of Alberto Aldes Arlandis, who was leading the course. And somehow it became my role more to handle all the different kinds of relationships between locals, between the course, the students, the city authorities, and then a research colleague of mine who stepped in this phase was more handling the students and their situations, like even like ferals, and almost becoming a part-time mother to them for the 2 weeks. And for example, tools we got from vocational school nearby, it all just emerged as a possibility. So everything really happened very quickly. And all this created actually new kinds, room for new kind of participation, and also new kinds of participants. So we got, for example, older men, quite a few of them who are quite skilled in building different things, but who might be a bit shy or somehow not so talkative in a way that they would participate into design workshops or these kind of events that we had even in Hiedaranta earlier. So they now, when seeing that something was happening and people were building and hearing that you could actually also come and participate and do something, so they were drawn into the process, and that was very, very exciting. And I guess here are a couple of researchers also in the crowd, so I want to share like how we then try to make science out of it. So how do you try to understand this kind of a situation where you were also yourself very, very much in there, and it was, you can imagine the intensity of 2 weeks really coming to the end of having the sauna there. And so we used an analog model, which means that it is almost like a metaphor. How do you use metaphors to understand things? But it is more something that you can understand dynamics as well. So it is a process that has something dynamic in it. And those 2 dynamics, when they are set parallel to each other, you can see similarities and maybe differences. and these kinds of analog models are not true or false, but they can be either productive or misleading. And here we used this kind of a Bénard cell analog model that is oil that is heated, and it starts first to form before starting to boil. It forms a certain kind of collective action, the oil molecules in this case, and by using this analog model, where first you can have the phase of certain kind of a heat, like a self-organizational phase where heat is coming into the picture, and then you have entrainment, where slowly the oil particles start to come together and find some kind of collective paths, and then you have a part of entanglement, where the molecules become entangled to each other in a way that collective movement emerges, and then the fourth phase is the boiling. So by having this in parallel to what actually happened with the sauna building, we could recognize this, for example, the phase that how the very different kinds of people became involved into the sauna building through different variety of paths, and how certain kind of synchronies and intensity started to become built. And actually those synchronies and intensity were very important for the sauna at last to start to be built. And then the third phase, it was also important to us to understand that actually, yeah, there was this phase when people were both moved by the co-creation and were moving the co-creation. So for example, this happened in relation to roles, like when, for example, I was forced to take certain roles because the co-creation was so intensively going on. But then again, I also took another kinds of roles, and I was used to doing in these kind of situations in order to make the co-creation to happen. And this was something that very many people experienced, and it was interesting to note. But then, like, what was the most valuable thing that came out of this kind of a use of an analog model was that we became self-critical, that we noted that yes, actually, well, in the end, it was boiling a bit. It got over. It got too intense, and the self-organization, the way how people tackled tasks as they saw them, and took these new roles just on the edge of their comfort zone, for example. This self-organization started to challenge the structures of the co-creation itself had started to happen. So, so in a way, this self-organization became a force that destroyed as well what we had already then. And how it was visible, this kind of a destruction was like people started to build also during nights in the end, and it a bit too tired. Tools were left here and there, and there was no person who could actually like take control or in a way that what is as it was this kind of a messy co-creative situation. So so who has the right to say what to do, and if there was no more maybe time or room for negotiating the common rules, so these were the challenges that we met. But in the end, everything went well. We made a couple of building mistakes that were then repaired afterwards. So we paid the bill of going a bit too intense in the end, but still. And for example, we got the building permissions something like 2 weeks after the sauna had already been ready. So that also showed how the official system couldn't keep up with the pace. But so what can be learned out of these kind of experiments and pushes is that co-creation is quite often used at the moment as a method in different kinds of, for example, public design processes or whatsoever. But what is lacking there is that usually these processes do not last long enough for this kind of a glue-like attraction to develop. So this glue-like attraction was something that was there in these people who lasted the 2 years to create the conditions, the groundwork for this kind of a sauna building to happen. And second, usually the tasks in these kind of co-creation processes where, for example, city is part, the tasks are so specific and limited, and there is not really room for people to invent their own ways of participating. As an example, there was one lady who had physical challenges, so that she couldn't build, but she invented another ways of taking responsibilities over information flow, for example, that we hadn't had time to even think about before she entered our group. And also the possibility to just jump into this kind of a doing is often quite limited in public co-creation processes. But then again, these things that we noted in the end, that the co-creation might also turn into co-destruction, it shouldn't be an excuse for not doing these kinds of experiments, but just to do them better and with more thinking and carefulness in them. But what was great here is that this kind of a experiment, it was able to create new kinds of participation and new kinds of politics of it. It was very proactive. We were not acting against anything, but more for something. Ideas were demonstrated in practice. That was very valuable thing, precious even, and it allowed personalized participation, as I already mentioned, and that is very rare. And people who participated into this hardly thought of themselves as activists or as doing something very different or somehow challenging anything. But then again, still, it was a process that was radically new to themselves as well as to the city. And now, before ending my talk, I want to invite people who are here to do specific things. If you get interested in the area or in these kinds of activities and talking about them, talking about urban activism or sharing your own experiences, we are going to have, as part of Urban Studies Days in April, excursion to the area that also involves the sauna and other actors. It's going to be the program published, I think, tomorrow. I can share the link. And then later on, we have also a researcher workshop coming on in this area in June. And there the aim is really to look into the relationship of activists and the spaces that they have appropriated. Like as I said, there is several different kinds of groups of people who have been in the area, realizing their everyday dreams, I could say. And maybe just with a couple of words, and we can continue with this in the discussion, that what is happening now with the sauna, it is becoming a bit more formal. So as in the beginning, the idea was that you can really warm it up whenever you want, and you can use it whenever you want, and it is a kind of a common responsibility to keep it clean and everything like that. Now it is more guided by a group of circus artists, and they are facilitating the sauna activity, and so it has become a bit more formal, and that reflects the formality that is growing in the area now as the development of the new part of the city is also unfolding. But yes, I will stop sharing here at this point, and then I will post all those links to you so one can see them later on, maybe.
Thank you, Elina. Fascinating. Both of the talks were very fascinating, and I really enjoyed your theorizing of self-organization, because self-organization is a topic that I'm very interested in as well.